On July 14, 1930, Albert Einstein welcomed the Indian poet, philosopher, and musician Rabindranath Tagore, the first non-European to receive the Nobel Prize, into his house on Berlin's outskirts. The two went on to have one of the most engaging, intellectually captivating debates in history, delving into the age-old conflict between science, faith, and religion. The following were Einstein and Tagore's conversation, which covered science, beauty, consciousness, awareness, and philosophy in a comprehensive examination of the most basic concerns of human life. I was captivated by their worldview and have used an AI program to generate their voices to speculate how they would have communicated with one another. Let us investigate further to comprehend the foundations of their beliefs and perspectives. And let us not forget the ancient Greek philosopher's famous quote, "An unexamined life is not worth living and has no value." The interactions begin with Einstein asking a question.
Do you believe in the divine as isolated from the world?
Not isolated. The infinite personality of man comprehends the universe. There cannot be anything that cannot be subsumed by the human personality, and this proves that the truth of the universe is human truth. I have taken a scientific fact to explain this. Matter is composed of protons and electrons with gaps between them, but matter may seem to be solid. Similarly, humanity is composed of individuals, yet they have their interconnection of human relationship, which gives living unity to man's world. The entire universe is linked up with us in a similar manner. It is a human universe. I have pursued this thought through art, literature, and the religious consciousness of man.
Albert Einstein may have thought that the divine was isolated from the human world, and therefore asked Rabindranath Tagore the Big Bang question. Do you believe in the divine as isolated from the world? In response, Tagore states that the divine is not isolated. A person's spiritual consciousness perceives the universe as a manifestation of separate and divided species that together make up the human universe. The basis for Tagore's scientific fact is that matter is composed of protons and electrons, separated by gaps, although it appears to be solid. Similarly, humanity seems to be made up of people who are separated and divided from one another, yet are linked by human relationships. The entire universe seems to be this way. Tagore believes that the universe is a human universe, and he has pursued this concept through art, literature, and spiritual consciousness of man. Is the divine isolated from the world? Is a question everyone has to ask in their lifetime and answer it.
There are two different conceptions about the nature of the universe. The world as a unity dependent on humanity. 2, the world as a reality independent of the human factor.
When our universe is in harmony with man, the eternal, we know it as truth. We feel it as beauty.
Einstein thought there are two different conceptions about the nature of the universe. The world as a unity dependent on human consciousness. The world as a reality independent of human consciousness. Tagore's perspective is that of the spiritual consciousness of man, the eternal, who knows the truth, feels its beauty, and experiences harmony.
The purely human conception of the universe.
There can be no other conception. This world is a human world. The scientific view of it is also that of the scientific man. There is some standard of reason and enjoyment which gives it truth, the standard of the eternal man whose experiences are through our experiences.
Einstein pointed out that it is entirely a human conception of the universe, to which Tagore said, "There can only be a human conception. This is a human world." The scientific viewpoint is that this is a human world. This notion provides a criterion of reason and delight that gives it truth, namely, to the spiritual consciousness of the man, whose experiences are through human experiences.
This is a realization of the human entity.
Yes, one eternal entity. We have to realize it through our emotions and activities. We realized the supreme man who has no individual limitations through our limitations. Science is concerned with that which is not confined to individuals. It is the impersonal human world of truths. Religion realizes these truths and links them up with our deeper needs. Our individual consciousness of truth gains universal significance. Religion applies values to truth, and we know this truth as good through our own harmony with it.
Einstein emphasized that it is the realization of the human entity. Yes, answered Tagore, and refers to the realized man who is connected with the spiritual consciousness as the supreme man. The realized man comes to the realization through his emotions, activities, and practices. The spiritual man transcends human constraints. Science is not concerned with the personal needs of individuals. Its only concern is with impersonal truths of the human world of man. The application of these truths brings harmony to man, says Tagore.
Truth, then, or beauty is not independent of man.
No.
If there would be no human beings anymore, the Apollo of Belvedere would no longer be beautiful.
No.
I agree with regard to this conception of beauty, but not with regard to truth.
Why not? Truth is realized through man.
So truth or beauty does not depend on man, wonders Einstein. As per Tagore, man determines both beauty and truth. Einstein inquires, if there were no more humans, the Apollo of Belvedere would no longer be beautiful, with a thought to quantum physics. The Apollo of Belvedere, also called the Pythian Apollo, is a celebrated marble sculpture from ancient antiquity. The piece has been dated to the 2nd century AD and is thought to be a Roman replica of an original bronze statue created between 330 and 320 BC by Greek sculptor Leocharis. Einstein agrees that beauty is a notion of human consciousness, but disagrees on truth, namely the absolute truth which he thinks is independent of human consciousness. Tagore's point of view is that the beauty and truth is realized by man. The subjective beauty of the Apollo of Belvedere would disappear if there were no humans to perceive its beauty. This is because there would be no one to witness it. Most people will claim that the beauty of Apollo will endure, arguing that you cannot prove it because you do not exist. Beauty isn't beauty until it is seen. Truth isn't truth unless it is realized. This should make it clear that interaction with duality requires two, the subject or observer, and the object, the Apollo of Belvedere, in this instance, to see its beauty. A few physicists understood that duality was an illusion. If we regard duality to be an illusion, then the beauty of the Apollo of Belvedere does not exist, because in reality there is no longer an observer to absorb its beauty. If we go much farther, the metaphysical viewpoint is, what seems to appearing as a subject and object is really an illusion. Certainly, science and religions have stumbled upon this truth.
I cannot prove that my conception is right, but that is my religion.
Beauty is in the ideal of perfect harmony, which is in the universal being. Truth, the perfect comprehension of the universal mind. We individuals approach it through our own mistakes and blunders, through our accumulated experiences, through our illumined consciousness. How, otherwise, can we know truth?
I cannot prove scientifically that truth must be conceived as a truth that is valid independent of humanity, but I believe it firmly. I believe, for instance, that the Pythagorean theorem in geometry states something that is approximately true, independent of the existence of man. Anyway, if there is a reality independent of man, there is also a truth relative to this reality. And in the same way, the negation of the first engenders a negation of the existence of the latter.
Truth, which is one with the universal being, must essentially be human. Otherwise, whatever we individuals realize as true can never be called truth. At least the truth which is described as scientific and which only can be reached through the process of logic, in other words, by an organ of thoughts which is human. According to Indian philosophy, there is Brahman, the absolute truth, which cannot be conceived by the isolation of the individual mind or described by words, but can only be realized by completely merging the individual in its infinity. But such a truth cannot belong to science. The nature of truth which we are discussing is an appearance, that is to say, what appears to be true to the human mind and therefore is human and may be called Maya or illusion.
Einstein believed that the absolute truth is independent of the human entity, and this was his faith, although he cannot prove it scientifically. He believes, for example, Pythagorean theorem in geometry states that the area of the square, whose side is the hypotenuse, the side opposite, the right angle, is equal to the sum of the areas of the squares on the other two sides is approximately true, independent of the existence of man. And if there is a reality independent of man, then there is also a truth expressing that reality. And in the same way, denying the existence of a reality independent of man is the denial of the existence of the reality associated with that truth. When this idea is linked to the subject, the observer, the beholder of the beauty to the object, the observed, the Apollo of Belvedere, a quantum physicist or anyone who understood that duality is an illusion, would say that the beauty of Apollo of Belvedere would not exist in the absence of the observer. Whereas Tagore discussed with Einstein the possibility of the individual mind merging with the universal being, the maker of the universe. Beauty is the ideal of perfect harmony, which is discovered in the universal being. We approach it by our own faults and blunders, our collected experiences, and our enlightened consciousness. How else can we know truth? The human truth, which can be described as scientific and which only can be reached through the process of logic and thinking. Tagore mentions there is still the absolute truth which can be grasped by the individual mind through the process of reason and completely identifying with its infinity. The nature of the truth he was discussing was only an appearance, that is to say, what appears to the physical senses. He goes on to say, what appears to be true to the human mind is therefore human, may be called an illusion.
So according to your conception, which may be the Indian conception, it is not the illusion of the individual, but of humanity as a whole.
The species also belongs to a unity to humanity. Therefore, the entire human mind realizes truth. The Indian or the European mind meet in a common realization.
The word species is used in German for all human beings. As a matter of fact, even the apes and the frogs would belong to it.
In science, we go through the discipline of eliminating the personal limitations of our individual minds and thus reach that comprehension of truth which is in the mind of the universal man.
Einstein points out to Tagore's that his conception, which may be the Indian conception, is not only the illusion of the individual, but of humanity as a whole. He mentions that the word species is used in German for all human beings. Even the apes and the frogs would belong to it. Tagore agrees that is not just Indian or European, but the common realization of the entire humanity. In science, one goes through the discipline of eliminating the personal limitations of our individual minds to reach the truth of the universal mind.
The problem begins whether truth is independent of our consciousness.
What we call truth lies in the rational harmony between the subjective and objective aspects of reality, both of which belong to the superpersonal man.
Einstein says, the issue is whether truth is independent of human consciousness. Tagore replies, what we call truth lies in the rational harmony between the subjective and objective aspects of human reality, both of which belong to the superpersonal man. I think the superpersonal man Tagore is referring to is the universal mind that made the entire universe, every form that appears to the bodily eyes. The metaphysical view is that this mind, being outside of time and space, is projecting bodily images. Identification with this universal mind, the maker of the illusion, is no ordinary understanding. That's why Tagore calls this perception the infinite personality of man, the supreme man, the eternal man, the superpersonal man. There is yet one more step to realizing the divine that is isolated from the human entity or the universal mind.
Even in our everyday life, we feel compelled to ascribe a reality independent of man to the objects we use. We do this to connect the experiences of our senses in a reasonable way. For instance, if nobody is in this house, yet that table remains where it is.
Yes, it remains outside the individual mind, but not the universal mind. The table which I perceive is perceptible by the same kind of consciousness which I possess.
What Einstein is saying is, we feel compelled to give objects a reality independent of the truth of our being. In other words, we give reality to objects that are not real. We do this to connect our experiences of our physical senses in a reasonable way. For example, if nobody is in the house, yet a table remains where it is. Yes, it stays outside the individual mind, and the table which is perceived has the same kind of consciousness which I possess, said Tagore, validating the notion that there is only one universal consciousness.
If nobody would be in the house, the table would exist all the same. But this is already illegitimate from your point of view, because we cannot explain what it means that the table is there, independently of us. Our natural point of view in regard to the existence of truth, apart from humanity, cannot be explained or proved, but it is a belief which nobody can lack. No primitive beings even. We attribute to truth a superhuman objectivity. It is indispensable for us, this reality which is independent of our existence and our experience and our mind, though we cannot say what it means.
Science has proved that the table as a solid object is an appearance, and therefore that which the human mind perceives as a table would not exist if that mind were naught. At the same time, it must be admitted that the fact that the ultimate physical reality is nothing but a multitude of separate revolving centers of electric force also belongs to the human mind. In the apprehension of truth, there is an eternal conflict between the universal human mind and the same mind confined in the individual. The perpetual process of reconciliation is being carried on in our science, philosophy, in our ethics. In any case, if there be any truth absolutely unrelated to humanity, then for us it is absolutely non-existing. It is not difficult to imagine a mind to which the sequence of things happens not in space, but only in time, like the sequence of notes in music. For such a mind, such conception of reality is akin to the musical reality in which Pythagorean geometry can have no meaning. There is the reality of paper, infinitely different from the reality of literature. For the kind of mind possessed by the moth which eats that paper, literature is absolutely non-existent. Yet for man's mind, literature has a greater value of truth than the paper itself. In a similar manner, if there be some truth which has no sensuous or rational relation to the human mind, it will ever remain as nothing, so long as we remain human beings.
Then I am more religious than you are.
My religion is in the reconciliation of the superpersonal man, the universal human spirit, in my own individual being.
Einstein inquired, if nobody would be in the house, the table would still remain, and this perspective is erroneous to Tagore's point of view, because we cannot explain what it means that a table is there, independent of human existence, implying that the table does not exist independent of us. Einstein, the genius who brazenly redefined the meaning of space and time, underestimated his discoveries and second-guessed himself. We find his struggle in these words: our natural point of view in regard to the existence of truth, apart from humanity, cannot be explained or proved, but it is a belief which nobody can lack, no primitive beings even. We attribute to truth a superhuman objectivity. It is indispensable for us. This reality, which is independent of our existence and our experience and our mind, though we cannot say what it means. Tagore's conclusion is, science has proved that the table as a solid object is only an appearance, not a reality. Therefore, that which the human mind perceives as a table would not exist as a table in the absence of human consciousness. Tagore admits that physical reality is nothing but a multitude of separate revolving centers of electric force, which also belongs to the human mind. In the apprehension of truth, there seems to be an eternal conflict between the universal mind and the individual mind. The process of reconciliation is being carried on in our science, philosophy, and ethics. In any case, if there is a truth that has nothing to do with people, then it doesn't exist for us. It's not hard to picture a thought where the order of things doesn't matter in place but only in time, like how the sounds of music are put together. For that kind of thought, this view of reality is like the musical reality, where Pythagorean geometry doesn't make sense. There is the seeming reality of paper, which is very different from the reality of books. Literature doesn't exist in the mind of the moth that eats the paper for living, but knowledge written on paper has more value than the paper itself in the mind of a man. In the same way, if there is some truth that doesn't have any mental or emotional connection to humans, it will always be nothing in the human mind. What Einstein was referring to as the truth independent of human entity is the same truth Tagore referred to when he said, the absolute truth, which cannot be conceived by the isolation of the individual mind or described by words, but can only be realized by completely merging the individual in its infinity. Infinity is the eternal now. The divine isolated from the world is the eternal now. The individual mind's ultimate endeavor to grasp the essence of the absolute reality leads to its own desolation and dissolution, leaving the individual mind with the divine mind. My name is Joe Bandra. I was born in the 60s in Hyderabad, India, and relocated to the United States in the 80s, where I studied at the universities of Stanford in Palo Alto, California, and Harvard in Boston, Massachusetts. I have worked in the area of medical physics for over 25 years, and I currently live about 45 minutes from Chicago's O'Hare Airport. I enjoy teaching metaphysics. I have been visiting social, religious, and educational institutions, sharing the truth of our being. In one of my talks, I have asked, "Have you known that? Have you known that? And by knowing you have known everything, and without knowing you have not known anything." The Big Bang answer to the question, is the divine isolated from the world, is yes, yes, and yes. The divine is isolated from the human world. The divine did not create the world or the universe. The divine did not create polarities, dualities, the subject and object, or all of its opposites. What our bodily eyes see is a vast illusion. What seems to appear as matter is actually energy. Matter at its most basic level is made up of quarks, leptons, bosons, and the Higgs boson. Some of the basic forces that hold matter together are gravity, electricity, the weak nuclear force, and the strong nuclear force. These forces work together to make atoms and molecules. The idea that we are bodies made up of atoms and molecules is a human truth or human delusion. Everything that seems to have form in the world, in the universe, and any parallel universes that can be seen or recognized are just mental images projected by the universal mind. Matter or energy is nothing, absolutely nothing, appearing to be really something, and so is our bodies. Many people are shocked to learn that we are not our bodies and that we are never in the bodies. This realization has really blown me away. Mind is not made up of matter. In fact, mind is outside of matter, outside of time and space. Where else could be the outside, except here now? The universal mind, which is here now, is projecting our seeming reality, and we believe it to be true. The divine mind has no projections. It is stillness now. And we find it very difficult to accept this truth. This moment is all there is. An hour from now is the now. A year from now is the now. 1,000,000 years from now is the now. We live in the eternal now, dreaming of our seeming realities. The greatest and the most beautiful gift we can accept now is the eternal presence. Be still and know.